Hello everyone, my name is Marcus Castillo, and I'm refuting the claim that the internet is a bad source for researching about your health. The three claims that my advocate made was that the information on the internet is unreliable. The second claim being that online pharmacies are a bad source of drugs, and the third that is that internet research greatens the effect on hypochondriacs. Firstly, in the advocate's first claim, he states that less than half of the information on the internet is accurate. And in a study done by Dr. G. Eisenbach, she states the 10 E's of e-health and the benefits of it, which are efficiency, enhancing activity, evidence-based, empowerment, education, engaging, extending ethics, equity, and encouragement. And the main part that is backed by this is the evidence base, is that the information on internet medicine and the results that do appear aren't exactly inaccurate, but it's the fact that since tests can't be done on the spot on the internet, that the information can only provide a vast amount, because the symptoms that you put in relate to so many different diseases, so specific disease can't be accurately found, so that you can find these specific disease amongst the list, but the rest are just ones that are related to your symptoms. So they're not exactly inaccurate, they're just not related to you exactly. And the second claim of how the online pharmacies are a source of bad drugs, there's a study done by Health Economics where they found that 52% of the websites online that do provide information and the selling of these drugs, there is the ability for you to contact actual pharmacists who can back this information and actually tell you whether or not you should be taking these drugs. And that when it comes to relying on certain websites, a majority of websites, and the most common, such as WebMD, provide results for information that allows you to get accurate diagnoses and allows you to get properly acquainted with pharmacists who can give you the proper drugs. And lastly, the claim of where hypochondriacs are empowered by this use of internet medicine. There is a study done by PLS Medicine in the UK where they state that there is a lack of robust research on the fact that implementing technology and e-health on the internet has a negative effect on your health. And they state that when it comes to hypochondriacs, there isn't a great deal of them that, compared to the number of people who use internet medicine as a resource, to have a negative effect, that the number of hypochondriacs do not necessarily detriment the benefit of internet medicine as a whole, and that it's a separate argument in a very small group. And so, with all that, relating back to the first claim stated by Dr. G. Eisenbach, is that there are more benefits to e-health and incorporating technology into the diagnosis of diseases and symptoms that you have, since it allows for a more immediate representation of what you can get, and then this way that when you further develop an understanding of it, then when you get diagnosed by a professional in person, it'll be more beneficial to have the knowledge prior.
All right. I think most of the points are pretty straightforward and simplified, which I appreciated. On the first point, it does get a little confusing about the 10 E's. I mean, you give us this, you list the E's, but what you need to do is kind of explain to us how this is helpful. How is this supposed to be used, and why does it mitigate that the advocate's argument that is made on this particular point? It mostly sounds like it's a warning to consumers. Here's how you're supposed to operationalize this sort of information online, and as a consequence, there's nothing wrong with finding out information, but there's always a context, and you have to, ultimately you have to speak to a professional about those kinds of things, which seems like a reasonable warning that anybody should take. Now, do people try and diagnose themselves online? I suppose that they do. There's always like we talked about, well, you mentioned the hypochondriacs, there's always somebody who's going to read something and say, I've got that, I've got that, I've got that. The fact that you have symptoms, though, is not necessarily indicative by itself that you have the particular illness. I mean, let's face it, this is basic reasoning. We talked about this sign reasoning here. Do you have a sufficient number of signs? Are there any contradictory signs? Are the signs, do they necessarily lead to this particular conclusion, or are they just ancillary kinds of issues? And I think that you raised a lot of questions there. Now, how do we make sure that people online get that? That's where you say, as you know, there probably the counterclaim that's missing here is that says, as people become more and more used to doing everything online, they become more sophisticated about using material online. All right, so 15 years ago, people were responding to email messages from Nigerian princes who wanted their account numbers so that they could shift their millions to them. And we've gotten a little bit smarter since then, and we don't do that anymore. Well, guess what? We've got the same sort of thing going online. People fell for hucksters online before, or they overreacted to something that they saw. But as we use the internet more, we recognize more and more the limitations that it's being presented. And that's why we need to have, that's why we've got these rules like the 10 E's that'll help us do that sort of thing. I think that's the way that that argument's supposed to be developing. It's just not quite there yet. All right, the second point, I thought, you know, again, similar recommendations, contact pharmacists. This is really an assertion on your part. You had an example of looking at WebMD for information. That's okay. I don't know how significant that issue was in the advocate's point. There's not really any reference to their evidence or reasoning on this particular point, so I think that's a little bit thin. On the hypochondriacs, yes, I was a hydrochondriac. That's somebody who needs too much water. A hypochondriac. I thought you had, you know, a good piece of information here that says there's a lack of research on this, so we can't reach this conclusion. What research did the advocate present? If they didn't present any, and you say, and the people who have done research say we can't reach a conclusion on this, I think you ought to go with that position. If they presented some kind of evidence on this, then this attempts to rebut it to some degree. And now we got to talk about why your evidence is more trustworthy than the evidence that they had. But like I said, we're not getting that contrast, and that's one of the things that you want to do. Look, I've got a study that says there's no way that we can make an estimate that this is a problem, and we think that the benefits substantially outweigh the disadvantages, and that's one of the conclusions of this sort of research. You know, there are always going to be hypochondriacs out there. There are always going to be somebody who misuses something, but we don't stop a whole variety of things because people misuse it occasionally. We try to prevent that from happening, and I think you can draw lots of parallel analogies to similar sorts of behavior. Sure, every once in a while somebody uses a chainsaw to dismember a family next door, but most of the time they just use chainsaws to cut down trees.